Okay, so we're recording now. So for the sake of anybody missing that, they can kind of jump back onto this. So I want to start off by having you watch a video. And if you've already jumped ahead and watched it already, that's great. But we're going to talk about it a little bit more. So let me pull up the video. Everybody can see this now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, good. So I'll press play and we'll go. If you can't hear it, let me know.
All right, guys, so I'm going to share with you my journey and what I've kind of been going through the past few months. Getting a lot of messages from my friends, especially my coworkers, as far as where I've been, what's been happening with me. So I wanted to share this with you guys because I think it's a really important message to get out there. So I've been suffering for a really long time, silently. I didn't know what was wrong with me. Thought something was wrong with me. I didn't know what it was. I just thought as you got older and older, you know, you started to feel more and more miserable, and that was normal. And that became my life. I really started isolating from my family, my friends. I was lying to them about, you know, what was actually going on the inside. I felt like a loser. I felt lost. Starting to feel really hopeless about, you know, my life, and my worth, and it just really started a really negative cycle. And I just thought that this was all normal. I didn't know that there was actually something wrong with me. On top of isolating everything like that, you know, I refused to speak my truth. I refused to talk to people about what was actually going on, everything in my life. Failed relationships, financial situation, stuff I've seen at work, everything. Just the normal days, normal day stresses of life. You know, I just took that on and stuff down. I refused to talk about them. I refused to be open and honest with anyone about what was actually going on. And it really started to affect me. And I started going down this road that was really, really dark. And what I now know is depression. The depression started to get really bad, and it started leading to me having anxiety attacks, which made things even worse. So I was trying to live up to this huge persona of some big tough guy and some persona that I thought I had to live up to. And the depression and now anxiety attacks, you know, I'm really, really lost. Things started going really, really bad for me. But all the while, you know, I had this mask on. Everything was fine. And I talked to my family, and I talked to my friends, and my coworkers, and I had a smile on my face, and I pretended that, you know, it was fine. So it eventually got to a point on September 14th. I got out of work. When I got out of work, I was feeling pretty much the lowest I've ever felt in my life. And I had a massive anxiety attack. And in that anxiety attack, things started getting really, really bad and really, really dark. I had no tools. I didn't know how to cope. I didn't know how to deal with the anxiety attack. So I was hyperventilating. I was crying. I thought I was going crazy. I thought I was losing my mind. And in that, eventually it led to me attempting suicide. And obviously that was not successful. And in some strange, fucked up way, it was the best thing that's ever happened to me because it forced me to get the help that I needed. So I spent 3 weeks at McLean Hospital in Belmont, where I received just the best care possible that you could ever imagine. The staff broke down every stigma, every barrier, every defense mechanism that I had. They broke it down, and I started talking. I talked to psychiatrists, I talk to therapists, behavioral therapists, I talk to mental health counselors, I talk to peer support, everyone. And I realized, the more and more that I talked about my truth and what was actually going on and my feelings and my emotions, the better I felt. For a really long time, I was in just that robot mode, and I absolutely refused to have any human emotion. And the more and more I talked, the more and more I cried, and the better and better I felt. So I want you guys to know now that, I'm discharged, I'm home, I'm safe, I feel great. I've got a great aftercare plan as far as doctors and therapists and meetings, and things are really going really well, and I feel really optimistic about my life and my future for the first time in a really, really long time. The reason, I really want to share this with you guys is because, the numbers show, especially in the law enforcement community, it's staggering, the numbers as far as who's suffering and suicide attempts and successful suicides. So my biggest message to you guys is, if you know someone who is struggling, a loved one, you got to reach out to them. You got to talk to them. You got to try to break through, even if they have a mask on and they're lying to you, right to your face. Talk to them. You never know what someone is actually going through. You can help save someone's life. And for those of you who are out there watching and you are struggling with depression, you don't know who to talk to, I want you to know that you're not alone. That was my biggest thing. I felt alone, so crazy. You're not alone. You're normal. Depression is very, very common. And I promise you, there are resources out there for you. And please, please, please reach out to me, talk to me. I am more than happy to share even more of my experience. You're not alone. So guys, I really hope that you share this. I hope that it can help someone. And again, if you have questions or anything like that, please don't feel free to ask. I'm more than happy to talk to the situation. And thank you guys for listening.
So kind of heavy to start the morning off with, right? So Rob is a friend of mine. He worked at the Worcester County Jail. He had started just before I left. And we kind of worked together for that very short period of time, that window. Rob's not alone. And the reason why I kind of switched up our topic this week is to kind of address this issue and to kind of give you all some insight, some personal insight into corrections at the officer subculture level. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but police officers and correctional officers have a life expectancy of around 55 to 59, depending on which one you are, a police officer or correctional officer, meaning that you're expected to die around 55 to 59. It has a divorce rate of 85%. So think about that for a moment as you're contemplating your futures of why. Why is the divorce rate so high? And I'm going to answer that for you in a little bit. The drug and alcohol substance abuse or addiction is 3 times the national average for correctional officers. And the suicide rate is roughly 7 times that the national average for correctional officers. And in the state of Massachusetts, it's 12 times the national average. So just last year, 25 correctional officers in the state of Massachusetts killed themselves. This isn't something that you see in the news. It's not something that gets advertised. It's obviously kept at a real low level. Corrections does not tend to get the publicity, say, that law enforcement does. So why? What's happening in this field that is critically impacting an officer's life in so many different ways? So I can answer a lot of the questions for that. And your assignment for this week is to interview a correctional officer. So what I'm asking you to do for the assignment is to talk about stress. And I'm going to give you a little bit of information so that you know whether or not you're getting bullshitted by the CO that you're going to interview. Get it? Because what I want you to do, there's a couple of reasons why I have students do this. One is that you can take Scott's opinion and kind of run with it and be fine with it. Some of you might go, well, you know, it's just that Scott's opinion. He's a community college professor and he teaches up at Anna Maria for a couple classes. That's just one person. What you're going to discover as a group is that I'm not alone. I worked 15 years direct inmate contact on the line, and I've seen some things that probably most of us should never ever see in their life. I've kind of given, on Tuesdays, I've kind of given you a little picture of it. And to be perfectly honest with you, I don't think I've given anybody, including my former wife, my ex-wife, my current wife, and my kids, and all of my students, a complete picture. Now, if you were all to get together and share everything that I've told you, including like all of my family and friends, you might be able to get the full picture if you were to put it together. But I kind of try to keep you guys all in silos. I tell you a little bit more, my students, a little bit more about my past than I tell other people, simply because of the fact that, for two reasons. The first reason is because I want you to be completely aware of this industry and this field. And that we talk about the offenders, and for the past 7 weeks, we've talked about pretrial detention. We've talked about diversion programs, intermediate sanctions. We've talked about probation. We really haven't gotten to the meat of the course. And I've warned you and said, hey, listen, this class is going to pick up around week 8. It's going to start moving a little quicker. It's not going to be this theory stuff up in the air, and that I'm going to actually give you real world information, things that might change your mind about entering into this industry, not just being a police officer or a correctional officer, just about coming into it, because there is a reality to it that I know that a lot of faculty don't share. And that's the second part of this. The second part is that it's therapeutic for me to share what I've experienced. I discovered this a long time ago when I first started teaching in higher ed, that I wasn't sharing with anybody what was happening at work. And when I started teaching, I didn't have the confidence that I had in the textbook. I knew how to read the textbook just like the rest of you, but I didn't have my confidence that I'll be honest with you, I thought somebody had made a huge mistake and hired me to go teach a college class because I was the kid with ADHD and learning disabilities. I was the dummy. So why and how would anybody hire me to teach at the college level? So that was my first year on the job. So I really didn't feel comfortable with reciting exactly what was in the book. And it's kind of molded how I teach now. So I started to tell stories to fill in the gaps of my lack of confidence. So, and I was obviously started teaching corrections. So I filled in the gaps by filling in them with stories that I wasn't sharing with my family. And why wasn't I sharing with my family? Well, that goes back to my first purpose. I want you to be aware of what's happening in this industry. I didn't want them to be aware of it. I didn't want them to know what I was experiencing. And I kind of gave you the very first story of Richie Prunier in class. There are many Richie Prunier stories. What I didn't tell you, and that I should kind of like lead into now, is having gone everybody's listened to Rob speak now, is that I was working in Control 1 of the Worcester County Jail and House of Corrections. That is it's the main gate. It's where people come into the facility both as visitors, and transportation delivers inmates to a back door that we have control over. And it's also a place, because of the fact that transportation is delivering inmates or picking up inmates, it's also a place where the officers are either handing their weapons over because you're not allowed to bring a weapon inside the facility, or they're it being issued a weapon to take an inmate to the hospital, or they're taking them to court. So the Control One is both the tip of the needle and the facility armory. So I was assigned to Control One often. It was usually a spot where the low person on the shift, the person with the least amount of seniority, was assigned. And I was new, and I was assigned. I was only a couple of years new, but there weren't many people that were behind me that were on that shift. So I was assigned to Control One, and we'll call him Mike. Mike came out to Control One and said to me, hey, Scott, I need a weapon. I'm going to take, I got a hospital trip. At that time, we never questioned if an officer had a hospital trip. If an officer, a fellow officer, came up and said, can I have a weapon? You would automatically issue them a weapon. You'd sign off on it at the time that you issued, what weapon it was, how many rounds or magazines that you handed off. And that's exactly what I did. About 10 minutes later, I got a call from my lieutenant and said, did you give Mike a weapon out of the armory? I said, yeah, he's going on a hospital trip. He goes, no, Scott, he took that weapon, he went down to the barn and shot himself in the head. Mike was a good friend of mine at that time. I didn't know that Mike was struggling. As the same, I didn't know Rob was struggling. I have had 4 friends kill themselves as a result of stress related from the job. Now, is it always because of the job? It starts off at the job. One thing that I always say to people that leave, that are retiring, people say to me, Scott, hey, what's it like not being there? And now it's been a while. I haven't been there since 2009. But I always say it's like a really good shower. But it's a shower that needs to last about 2 years to clean yourself of that place. And when I say clean, it's not the physical clean, it's a mental cleanse. When you walk in that door, you can be idealistic. You can be, I'm going to change the world. I'm going to help an offender. I'm going to make this a better place because of my efforts. You soon realize that we all walk in with that same sense of pride and that sense of accomplishment, in that you are going to do some good. It's a big hit when you realize that under our current system, there's nothing that we can do. So think of that mentally, that there's nothing that you can do. I went on a string. I think I told you the story in 2004. I had a major operation. I had my ankle rebuilt as a result of being hit with an object from an inmate. And then again in 2007, I apologize if you hear any noise in the background. It's the construction. And then in 2007, I had another injury that had my shoulder rebuilt and my bicep reattached. But these were not the only 2 incidents I had ever been involved in. And that's something that's probably really important to note, is that the 2 times that Scott got involved with an inmate, he got hurt, which is far from the truth. I was getting into a fist fight at least twice a week. I was walking by an inmate cell, and I say an inmate cell in the sense that this wasn't the first time, or many times. It happened often. I was walking by an inmate cell, and I just got punched in the head. And you're by yourself on the floor with 120 inmates. Everybody knows what's happening. And the only person that can come to your rescue is the guy or the lady that's up in the booth that you hope isn't reading the newspaper. So something to understand is that as a correctional officer, we're not allowed to have weapons. You don't walk around a correctional facility with a baton. That's the olden days. You don't walk around with a knife. You don't walk around with a gun. You walk around with a radio, handcuffs, Kevlar gloves, and your own wits. And if you don't have the ability to defend yourself, then you end up not really lasting that long, or you end up getting hurt a lot. So like I said, I was getting in a fist fight a couple times a week. So take that stress. I was involved in 14 suicides, direct suicides. I probably could say I was involved in 60 suicides, but I say 14 because I was performing CPR on 14. I was doing life-saving measures. And I'll never forget, people say to me, how do you manage that? How do you mentally get past that? And I'll be honest with you, the very first suicide that I responded to and was providing CPR to the person, I was only at the jail a couple weeks, and we had a policy back then that the offenders could not die on property. So whatever you had to do to keep their blood flowing, you had to keep doing that until they got off the hill towards the hospital. If they died, then that was the responsibility of the paramedics or the EMTs, not ours. So we could turn around annually, the sheriffs, both Flynn and Glodis, could turn around and say, we've only lost 2 inmates. No, well, that's not true. You lost 22, but 2 ended up dying on the ride. So it's important to note that that my first encounter wasn't the expected response. That I actually was kind of shocked at my response. I remember it vividly. The individual actually had a heart attack. It wasn't a suicide. He had a heart attack, and it was a self-induced heart attack. He knew that he had a serious heart condition, and he was purposely running in his cell and doing push-ups and sit-ups as fast as he possibly could to put his heart in exertion. So you could say it was a suicide, but it was a heart attack. So the inmates notified me. I was on that tier, and they said, something's wrong with so-and-so. And I ran over there, and there he was unconscious, laying on the floor. So I called for assistance, medical assistance, and started to perform CPR. And the nurse came. She had already knew who he was and said, this is definitely a heart attack. We need an ambulance immediately. So I called that, and the nurse, I was doing chest compressions, and the nurse pulled out the ambu bag and started doing the rescue breaths. This is when we used to do that 15-in-1 ratio. And the paramedics arrived, and I continued on with my chest compressions while they were doing the other things, stabilizing the neck, creating an airway, all of that stuff. And we put him up in the gurney, and I straddled him like a horse, and all the way out to the ambulance, I continued chest compressions. So there's something that I'm not saying this as a gruesome thing. It's something that just sits in my mind. And this is, again, part of those 2 reasons why I gave you earlier, is that when you give proper chest compressions, you crack ribs, you break them. And it sounds like popcorn. So as you're going down and doing that chest compression, you can hear the ribs breaking. And it's something that sits in my mind. So that was my first one. And somebody said to me, Scott, and he died, by the way. And somebody said to me, Scott, how do you get past that? It was my first one. And I said, I don't know. It doesn't bother me. It's not bothering me at all. For some strange reason, to this day, it didn't bother me. I mean, I can recall it, but it didn't bother me. What bothered me was around 5, I think it was 5 or 6, I cut an inmate down and he attacked me. He had built a noose. And when you think of when somebody hangs themselves, typically people think of throwing it up over something high and jumping off of it. Inmates will tie it to their bunk and then sit on the floor. At any point, they can stand up and stop it. But what they do is they just tie the noose onto their bed made out of sheets and then just sit down. And and stop the blood flow to their brains. I saw this inmate. I cut it off, and immediately jumped up and attacked me, kept calling me bad CO, bad CO. And he was crying. That's the one I saved him. And that's the one that to this day still sits in my mind. I had this is probably the most gruesome one, but this one doesn't bother me as much because it wasn't, the circumstances that led up to it weren't as bad. When I was in charge of classification, I was working the evening shift, and a guy came in and was clearly, even from the intake process, before he even came down to my office, he was clearly suicidal. So the officers at receiving had called me and said, hey, this guy's going AWOTCH, just to let you know. And we have a special spot in that hallway, that kind of newcomer hallway, that we put them until we process them and get them into a cell. So I had interviewed the guy and agreed and said, yes, he's definitely AWOTCH. So under regulations in Massachusetts for, I'm going to stop sharing, Rob. Oh, no, I'm not. All right. I thought I was. Under regulations in Massachusetts, a inmate that's on AWOTCH cannot be taken off of AWOTCH unless done so by a mental health professional. In other words, somebody that comes and evaluates the person, that's got the college degrees and everything, that says that, based upon my opinion and experience, this person is no longer suicidal, or we're going to downgrade it to a BWATCH. So I had left that night, and we were seeking ACA accreditation, the American Correctional Association accreditation. It's a big feather in your cap if you're a correctional facility. So I was meeting one of the accreditors to give him a tour of the modular complex. And we entered into at the time, my old building. One of my closest friends work in that building, even the ones that these are the people that I consider my family today. And they had a temporary officer. I kind of grew up in that building. It's called the K&L building. So I took the accreditor down there, and as we were walking, we were kind of doing what most people do. So how long you've been doing this? Kind of measuring each other up. And he goes, wow, you've probably seen pretty much everything. And we had entered the building, and there's a tier above us. It's a giant open day room. And it was roughly around 7:05, and that's about the time that we start to feed all of the inmates breakfast in the building. And when he said to me, oh, you've probably seen everything, it couldn't have been a better cue for what was about to happen. We were underneath the second tier. There's doors behind us, cell doors behind us, and we open up the cells in 5 cell sections, so that there's not a bottleneck and people aren't pushing each other, and that there's not any issues. And just as he said that, those doors opened up, and a guy named Steven ran out of his cell, stepped on the railing of the second tier, and did what would be considered an Olympic gold medal swan dive into the cement floor right in front of me. I'm talking 3 feet. And the sound of his skull hitting the ground was like throwing a entire mechanic's tool chest off a 3-story building onto a cement ground. The sound, I'm not even exaggerating in any way. I can't express to you how loud that sound was. And the officer on the floor that was supposed to be supervising was a temporary officer. He had only been there for a couple of days. And he just sat there. And the guys up in the booth, again, we go back to, you hope that somebody's watching you and their head's not planted in the newspaper. The guys up in the booth were not paying attention. They heard the bang, but they didn't come running. They walked over it. And by that time, I'm yelling to the officer, put these guys in. The other guys that had been let out, I'm saying, put these guys in, put these guys in. And He's frozen. So I ran over to him. I grabbed his radio because at the time I didn't have a radio. I didn't need one for what I was doing for work. And I grabbed his radio and I said, K building, put everybody in immediately. And then I announced to dispatch that we were going to need EMS and medical staff to report to the K building and that all officers need not respond. The reason I said that the officers didn't need to respond was because there was gray brain matter all over the floor. There was really not much that we were going to be able to do. But we still had to do the whole checklist thing that you're looking for living, breathing flesh, that you perform CPR until somebody qualified comes in and pronounces the person dead. So Steve was on his chest when he landed. So we needed to get him on his back. So we also needed to, just in case, we also needed to secure his neck. And by doing that, we had to do a technique of securing his shoulders and securing his head between my forearms. And when I did that, my right forearm went into his head. It was the most disgusting feeling that I've ever had. The thing that began to actually impact me, this wasn't seeing this gruesome, horrific, traumatizing thing, was not something that was bothering me. It took me back for a moment. I was kind of like, wow, but it wasn't something that I turned my eyes away from. It wasn't something that kept me up at night, that was going to keep me up at night. I had seen a lot. What bothered me most is that when we were attempting to open up Steve's airway to perform rescue breathing, we couldn't get air to go in. We were using the ambu bag and I couldn't get the air to go in. And that temporary officer said, maybe we should readjust. And I said, go ahead, like a jaw lift. And I said, oh, go ahead, but check the airway first. And the temporary officer opened his mouth. And in there was a suicide note and a picture of his wife and daughter. That was the point that I went, crap. Because it makes it real. This is not an inmate anymore. This is not a cog on the shelf. This is a person that had people that he loved, that may have loved him back. This is a person that had a life. And based upon the circumstances, the embarrassment of it, he decided that that was going to be his way of dealing with it, and by taking his life. So I've given you a couple different scenarios: officer suicides, inmate suicides. And the continuous assaults that occur on the job. So that is just a part of the types of stress that officers encounter. There are other things that also come into play, such as miscommunication or a lack of communication or a lack of support from the administration. There are eating habits are horrible. How many of you have jobs? Most of you, right? Those are your cameras on. Do you get breaks at your jobs? Like you get like a 15-minute break? So police officers and correctional officers don't get breaks. There's no time to say, okay, you're going to log off. You're going to punch out for the moment, go eat your lunch, and then in 15, 30 minutes, come back in and punch back in. It's not how it works. It's an 8-hour shift. You eat when you can eat. And a lot of people don't realize it, that people make jokes about how police officers are always at the Dunkin' Donuts or at a donut shop. Well, try having a steak dinner or a hamburger and you're getting called if you take a bite. I made a joke one night that I had dinner at work 7 times. I tried to have dinner 7 times. And then got so angry, I threw my food out because I had microwaved it 7 different times, because every time I went to go take a bite, I got an all officers assistance call over my radio, which you can't go. Gotta eat, guys. You've got to stop what you're doing and go help out your fellow officers. So I got so frustrated, I threw my meal away. And now I'm hungry and I'm cranky. And I've got that hangry feeling. Think of that as what's the best type of food that you can eat that's going to get rid of your hunger pains really quick? Carbohydrates. Fills your stomach up really quick. And what's the quickest way? What's the best carbohydrates? A donut. Throw a couple donuts and you can eat a donut while you're running. I mean, it's a quick way. Now, add eating donuts or quick carbohydrates to 20 years of service. Every officer's got to have a little belly because there isn't a time to eat the right way. So we take the diet and the stress and the keeping of the job away from your loved ones. Who do you have to talk to? Well, in 2021, you can talk to your other officers. Back in 1970, 1980, 1998, if Rob had posted that video in 1998, he would have been pushed out of the job. He would have been told he wasn't fit to work there. He would have been called weak. He would have been called names. He would have had a nickname that was assigned to him for the rest of his life. I went to academy with, I told you guys the story about Dan. Well, we'll call him Dan. Dan often complained of colds in the academy. He worked at the sheriff's department for 23 years. In the academy, he was given a nickname called Sniffles. That name never left him for 23 years. It's called Sniffles because he complained about the physical fitness in the academy. 23 years ago, this guy carried the name Sniffles. So if you had approached another officer with, I'm not feeling okay, I don't understand why this person attacked me after I saved their life, or I don't understand how an officer could take his own life. The night that, well, I think I called him Mike. The night that Mike took the day that Mike took his life, my fellow officers, I wasn't 21 yet. And mind you, I started at the jail at 20. My fellow officers said, "Oh, Scott, you've had a rough day." Mike was a different one. So they said to me, "You've had a rough day. Let's go drinking. And we'll go up to the bar and have some drinks." That is how we dealt with our stress. We drank it away. And I remember when I first started there, my father warned me and said, they're all booze bags, Scott. They're all booze bags. Don't get stuck. Don't get pulled into the crowd with them. You're going to end up with a problem. And he was right. A lot of the guys that I work with have substance abuse issues. Some of my closest friends to this day still struggle with their addictions. It was a way of coping with, because you weren't taught and you weren't encouraged and you just didn't have the tools available to you to talk about the stress of the job, what you were experiencing. And that, again, like Rob said, he felt isolated. He felt alone. Well, this was 2019. Rob made that video about 4 weeks after his attempt. It was a little less than 4 weeks after his attempt. So he's doing well now. He doesn't work there anymore. But we didn't have the support structure. I remember the first melee that we had gotten into. I was still young, and I thought that one of the things I liked about the jail is that I could fight. That was something I was good at in my entire life up to that point. I was like, I suck at math, I suck at science, I suck at school, but I can fight. So getting a job at the jail was like, yeah. So when I got into my first fight, I was like, my adrenaline was pumping. I was like, yeah, let's put them all in. I wasn't qualified to be on the job, but by the time you hit your 30s, you're like, listen, I don't need to do this stuff anymore. This is stupid. It was just a different time, and we didn't have the resources available. On that first melee I got into, I was kind of shaken up because it wasn't like a normal fist fight. It was, I walked into the gym and 50 inmates were beating each other and the officers with free weights. I mean, we're talking, we didn't have universals. We had free weights, and they're taking a 45-pound plate, smashing somebody in the head with it. And nobody ran away. We all ran towards it. And we did what we had to do. And afterwards, I was kind of shaken up going, wow, a one-on-one or a two-on-one, I expected stuff like that. But this was totally something that was out of my lieutenant looked at me and said, he goes, you look a little shaken up. I go, yeah, just a little bit. He goes, shake it off. Get back to your post. Now, if that happened today, they'd be like, all right, they call the supervising officer of that unit and say, hey, Scott's not going to come back for a little bit. He's going to sit in my office. We're going to chat about some stuff. And that's exactly what the supervisor would do, the lieutenant or the captain. That's what they're tasked with. Or they call in the stress management officer. And then you talk about it. And if the stress management officer doesn't feel that you can return back to your post, they send you home. They say, you're more of a liability to us now, and we need you to go home and get your head straight. Go to the EAP, the Employees Assistance Program. So what I'm trying to do with you, for all of you, is build you this backdrop, this scene of a play. And I'm giving you all of these little components to come to the very conclusion of why an officer like Rob would want to take his life. Why would somebody have an alcohol addiction? And why is the divorce rate so high? That has a lot to do with overtime, and it has a lot to do with not sharing or not communicating with your spouse. I was married. I met my my first wife when I was 19, and I didn't share much. But I think that in retrospect, I think that didn't bother her so much. I watched all of my friends get divorces and throughout their careers. And I felt really confident that I wasn't going to get a divorce. That everything was, my personal life was perfect. And I never saw any writing on the wall. I never saw anything. And I figured that all of the guys at work they weren't sharing things at home. They weren't talking about their issues. And I really wasn't either. I was talking about little bits and stuff, but I wasn't sharing everything. And again, I don't think that she really cared. And what astonished me when I ended up getting divorced, it wasn't the jail or the job of being a criminal justice practitioner that caused the end of my marriage. It was being a college professor that ended my marriage, because now I was home more. I was able to spend more time with her and the kids, and that became too much. So I warn you that most of people, unlike myself, most of the people that I'm friends with, in a significant portion of them, are divorced. They're divorced because they acquired a drug or alcohol addiction. They didn't share their emotions, and they brought work home in the sense that they were stressed and angry all the time. There's a way to mitigate this. It's very clear. You go speak to somebody, and you speak to your spouse about everything. So I've rambled on for quite a bit. I was trying to give you some information that you might be able to build your questions up for your interviews. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Anything? You're not going to hurt my feelings if you ask me anything. Nikki, I'm sorry about your Zoom. Your internet sucks.
I know, it always does this to me.
Does anybody have any questions about the interviews that you're supposed to be doing for this assignment, for the assignment this week? How many of the four, other than the 4 students that have their videos on, how many of you have stayed at your computer?
I did.
Kristen did. I wasn't checking. I'm not going to be a jerk and check you guys. You guys are fine. But do you guys have any questions on the officer subculture? The officer suicide? The interview? How many of you have somebody to interview?
I
Me.
do. Not yet.
Blake, not yet.
Yeah, not yet.
So let me pull something up for you. I highly recommend, if you don't have anybody, to contact the Worcester County Sheriff's Department. If you're struggling after you've made all the efforts on your own, if you're struggling, I can reach out to some people and see what see if I can get you some interviews. If you go on to, I'm looking for the Facebook page. If you go on to the Massachusetts Correctional Officer Facebook page, you might be able to just say, hi, I'm a student at Anna Maria College in the criminal justice program. I'm looking to interview somebody. Is anybody willing to be interviewed? You might have some real success in that. So this is a public group. If you go to this one and you can't find somebody from Worcester County, if you go here and just post it, you should be able, somebody will reply to you. More often than not, you're going to get, I put this out because at the other school, they have them do the exact same assignment. And I put it out there and I got like 30 officers that replied and said, yeah, put me down, I can help. So if you just reach out, somebody's willing to do it and they're looking to talk to somebody. And more often than not, they're going to try to convince you never to become a correctional officer.
Do you know if you could like, put the link on like a like make a discussion or something like that, announcement?
Yeah.
I can't find it.
For the Massachusetts Association of Correctional Officers?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll do it.
Thank you.
This is a good one too, that you might be able to reach out. It's Makufu. Makufu is the union for the correctional officers. And I'm looking for that other one. I'm not logged into Facebook on my computer, so. I'll send it out as an announcement because I'll log into Facebook later on. I have no idea what my password is.
Okay.
So any other questions? Anything? You guys are halfway through the semester. Are you feeling the light at the end of the tunnel yet?
No.
It's coming before you blink your eyes. I mean, it's going to fly by. And then COVID will be done. You'll all have vaccines and everybody will be back at the beach. Well, if you don't have anything, I'll let you guys go a bit early. And if something does come up and you do have any questions, obviously just reach out to me. But please try to set up your interviews as soon as possible. And I'm going to warn you that your job is to make yourself available to the correctional officers. These guys and ladies have careers, families. They're juggling a lot, plus the stresses that I just talked about. So make it easy on them and try to be as accommodating as possible when you're making your interviews. I want to preface that your interviews should be either Zoom or by phone. You should not be visiting anybody face to face. Let's still live in the world of COVID and not put anybody else at risk. Also, keep in mind that correctional officers are with the demographic of our society that is more than likely not going to get the vaccine. And the numbers at correctional facilities in the state of Massachusetts are skyrocketing. So you really don't want to be near that CO because they have to be near COVID. And just because you have the vaccine doesn't make it so that you're not a carrier. So if you don't have any questions, I'll let you go. And I will see some of you in a little bit for the next class. You can all
Thank you.
log off.
Thank you.
Thank you.